Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Fernay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Fernay.
All right, hey, welcome to the Maryland Crabs Podcast. This is John Fernay. I've got Tim Hamilton here.
Hello.
And we have some really very interesting guests today. We have the chairman of the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis, otherwise known as HACA, Sandra Chapman, with us. And we also have one of their board members, one of the newer board members, which is Chip Doordan, who used to be the chair of Arundel Medical Center. And he is a fairly new board member with HACA. And what we're going to do is just to really discuss what's up with HACA. We've got some misinformation that's out there with as far as crime, what they're doing. HACA has some problems. They've got a plan, and hopefully we're going to get into it and just sort of enlighten some people as to what's really going on here. And I'd like to say thank you both for taking the time to meet with us, Ms. Chapman and Mr. Doordan. How are you guys today?
Just fine. Thank you for having us.
John, if I might, in fairness to all the wonderful board chairs I had over the years, I was never the board chair. I was the CEO of the Arundel Health System. But
that sounds more important, actually.
I had some great volunteers, as Sandra is for HACA. It's a good analogy of folks that were the chairman of the board of the health system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the correction. But you've obviously been a staple in the community for many, many years, and I would think that with your leadership, what we see out on Jennifer Road, probably you may disagree with me, but I don't think it would exist. And I've had some personal experiences both with myself and my children in the hospital, and nothing but praise for it.
Well, and one more thing I would say, and I always say this: we have had and still do a lot of great folks that make it happen. So I was privileged to be part of it.
Absolutely, but personally, thank you for your insight and your hard work over the years, and certainly for what you're going through now with joining the board of from HACA. I guess the first question I have for you is, what drew you to the board? I mean, obviously, Mayor Pantelides contacted you and said, "Hey, I think you might be a good voice."
And it's a thankless job. There's a lot of fire that's going along with this right now too.
Yes, well, actually,
he realized that from the beginning.
Keep that secret.
He still looks a little shell shocked.
And that's really not how it happened. I volunteered. I went to the mayor and said, for a number of years, obviously, with the hospital, we had, and still do, a lot of folks who lived in under the HACA's residences that worked at the hospital. And I've watched the transportation systems, and I've watched seems like the annual 5 or 7 days of the Capitol's expose every fall of what's wrong or what's going on at the housing. And after I retired, I've been looking for something where I could give back and perhaps add some value. So I actually volunteered with the mayor as somebody, and it went from there to interviews and whatever, and I'm ultimately appointed. But I took this on with my eyes wide open.
That's fantastic, and that's something that I had never really, never put two and two together. But with your experience through the hospital with obviously patients and folks that have worked there, and how it all ties in there. So
it does. And I said that during the interview process, how the housing and health are closely related in so many different ways. If folks have good housing, it helps with their health, and of course, as I was leaving, and Sandra was very much a part of this, Tori Bayless, who is now the CEO, took the initiative, and now the Arundel Health System actually has at Morris Blum facilities to work with the residents, and And Tori and I have talked, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to expand that.
Well, that's fantastic. Mrs. Chapman, how did you come up on the board here? I know you were also an appointee of Mayor Pantelides, correct?
Yes. Years ago, back in the 70s, I was a board member then.
Of where?
I was a board member back in the 70s. During Ostracell time, Marita Curl was the chairperson of the board for years and years. So I was a board member then. I lived in Robinwood at the time, and I was very involved. And Pip Moyer appointed me to the board at that time.
I'll interrupt you. I love Pip Moyer. I had the chance to meet him 3 times. Incredible guy, along with Zastro Sims. I met him. I was fortunate enough to meet him. What a character.
Yes, very much so. So I was on the board then, and I ended up leaving the board because I got a job at the County Housing Authority. And during that time, you couldn't work for one and be a commissioner on the other one. And years later, I moved away. I left Annapolis for 15 years, and I came back. I've been back in Annapolis about 5 years. I moved into Morris Blum, and I just automatically did what I had left doing before. I became involved with the Resident Advisory Board, which is made up of all of the resident councils in public housing here. Somehow, I got asked to be on the mayor's transitional team, and I got on the mayor's transitional team for housing, and then I was asked if I would like to be a board member by the mayor, and that's how.
And then they selected
the
you.
rest is history.
They selected you as chair.
Yeah.
So you have about 30 years difference between the last time you were on the board and this time, essentially.
Yes.
And she just glared at me. Don't mean that.
Yes, that's true.
But so we interviewed Mr. Robert Eads a few weeks ago, and everyone knows Mr. Eads. And he's not a shrinking violet. And he lamented the changes between public housing when he was a child and now. He said it's very different. And
It is very different.
You know, and for the rest of Annapolis that doesn't go into public housing, knows nothing about public housing, it's just there. You don't know that there's seasons, you don't know there's changes, you don't know what's going on. You just drive past it when you're going through Eastport, and occasionally on Facebook you hear about the problems that are going on, but it never occurs to the other Annapolis that there's any sort of change or issues within public housing. What have you personally seen that's been a big change in public housing from within, and then maybe the way the city has dealt with public housing since the last time you were on the board?
The city is very involved in public housing now. This is a first. Even when I was on the board before, and Pip Moyer, he at one point worked at the Housing Authority. It's been a long time. I believe he was acting ED, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that makes sense.
So that was after he was the mayor. Anyway, so the involvement with the city now is completely new. The changes that I see, I was very fortunate. My mother lived in public housing, but I didn't grow up in public housing. I always lived with my grandmother. When I lived in public housing, I was in Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury Square has always been the, for lack of a better word, the best of public housing.
And for those who don't know, Bloomsbury Square is downtown, but it overlooks College Creek, I believe.
Exactly.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Sort of in
It's beautiful.
backyard of St. John's.
And about
That's
10
right.
years ago it was renovated, so it's so even at the time, I think even people outside of public housing understand that is the choice.
That's
of public
right.
housing.
And at the time, the state was just starting to really negotiate, taking part of the property and all. But my children grew up with St. John's as their playground, which was great. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody looked out for each other's child. And in most public housing, back in those days, that's how it used to be. Mm-hmm. It's not like that now.
I know Mr. Eads, when we spoke with him, he was telling us a story about how the sense of community that you really had in the public housing that's lost. And he said, you didn't do drugs in the public housing because somebody's mom would get a hold of you.
That's right.
That's right. And he said, so then we went down into Washington Street, down where the boats were. We'd have somebody out there. He had a great story about, how.
Very true, because everybody looked out for each other.
And maybe that's not just public housing. Maybe that's just where society is now.
That's right. That's definitely a big part of it.
I know growing up, my biggest fear was getting caught by my friend's parents.
Sure.
Yes.
That I'm telling your mom is.
Mm-hmm. Well, they used to
just spank
take
me or
a hold
something?
of you and take you to your mom back then. Now, with this new generation, younger people having children, I think that makes a difference. You have to be very careful. You can't just catch a hold of someone's child because they've done something wrong and take him home and say to the parent, this happened or that happened. You don't have that anymore.
Well, it's interesting getting perspective when you talk about the structure of the board. So, and we've talked about this with Mr. Eads, that you got two middle-class white guys trying to understand public housing. He can describe it to us, but you don't quite get it. My wife's family's from a small town in Appalachia, and it's the poverty runs rampant there. Even though we have a similar ethnic background, I don't understand her experiences. She can explain them to me, but I don't. So when you talk about a board, and I believe that I think the board requirements is that one person has to be a resident of public housing. I believe
It's
two people. Okay, there's a big value to that because they actually know when the rubber meets the road what's reality.
That's right.
Right, and I think it's hard for people coming into a board, and that's got to be a challenge for you. Is that you presumably haven't lived in public housing, so you have to understand the unique challenges that comes with the residents of public housing that isn't often heard.
Well, that's for sure. I did not grow up in public housing, so there are things, and I have to learn. I'm learning the whole business, quite frankly, and what our responsibilities are, and the various talents that are needed on the board in order to fulfill the responsibilities.
So the way I guess you both have different roles is that Ms. Chapman, your role is really kind of the heart and soul of the experience because you understand at ground level what's happening. Mm-hmm. And then you're bringing in kind of the business acumen saying, okay, I'm going to be a little bit clinical because I'm going to look at the business side of the board. And although I don't probably have first-hand experience of what the people are going through who live in public housing, I can be dispassionate about it. And I can understand, that the issues that are facing the board itself and the relationship with the city and with HUD, and et cetera.
I could be, but I'm not dispassionate about it. The analogy for me is that in the health system, my number one priority was the patient. As a board member of HACA, my number one priority is our residents. So the analogy is the same. So I'm as passionate, at least as passionate, as I at my age and stage right now for what I'm doing related to public housing and to our residents, as I always was and always will be for the patients that are served at Anne Arundel Health System.
That's fantastic. Well, the other thing you mentioned too, let's talk about John Dillon a little bit, who's the latest appointee. And you had mentioned that Mr. Doordan didn't grow up in public housing, and Mr. Dillon didn't, but he spent a lot of time in public housing out west when he was in California. Is that going to be a great thing to have a business background, as Mr. Dillon does, as well as the experience of living in public housing? I mean, is that going to help HACA as they move on and move forward from here?
I'm sure it will,
because
he understands both sides. So
right.
it have to be a plus. I think that the board needed some changes. I'm very happy with the changes that is on the board now. I love the idea of what Chip can bring to the board. I don't have a business background, especially not to the point that he do. We need that. I can think of a time where we disagreed on the way we should handle something, but the good thing is we can sit and we can discuss it. I'm going to give him my side. He's going to give me his side. We're going to come from two different streets, but we're going to come to the Y in the road and end up going.
It's the way it should be.
Yeah. She always wins. And rightfully so.
I love what's on the board now because it's so diverse, and it needs to be.
And there's been a lot of turmoil and turnover in the last couple of years too with the board. And
how long are the terms of the board members?
5 years.
5 years.
We're appointed by the mayor with the approval of the city council, and the term, and it's dictated by city law or code, is it's a 5-year appointment. You can be reappointed.
There's no term limit.
There's no requirement that you be. It's at the pleasure of the mayor and the city council.
But after the appointment and the confirmation, then you're completely autonomous. Yes.
For all practical purposes, yes.
Right.
Our loyalty is to the HACA board and to the bylaws and to what our responsibilities.
And some of the criticisms up to this point has been the accountability, but the transparency of the board. And we record this a week out. So about a couple days ago, or probably about 3 or 4 days ago, there was an article about increased transparency. The frustration you generally hear, and it's vocal on Facebook for the most part, is the Eastport residents who live right up against Harbor House and Eastport Terrace. And they get along fine with residents, but the crime has been the issue. And they felt, and you can see the frustration, and you're only getting one side again because you're not hearing the residents' frustration because they don't really have a voice in so much as outside of the rest of Annapolis. But you hear the residents of Eastport.
Oh, they have a voice, and they express it. I think the big difference is that they don't express it in the same way. It's more so
internal,
right? Where the outside part of Eastport, they come to the city council and express it. They get coverage from the paper,
right?
That's not happening with the residents.
Who also share. By the way, I make the assumption we've been talking to Mr. Eads and talking to Jessica Packler, who is an unofficial spokesperson, or at least she's a voice coming from Eastport. They really sympathize with the residents of public housing, and they all want the same things. So I think the frustration that is shared by both the residents who live close to public housing, and they insist that they are neighbors. They are not outside of public. They're part of the neighborhood, and they're very insistent on that. And the residents is that they look at the responsiveness to the police, number one, the city, and for HACA. Those are the three. So is this now where a time that you see an interaction between the three? Because I don't think the working relationship, just from the outside, has always been particularly close with all of the three groups, with the city and the police, with the residents and the police, and with HACA itself. With the restructuring of the board, does that change?
Sandra can talk to the past. I can only talk to the present, and through the mayor's efforts and initiative, a lot has been going on of regular meetings between the administration and many of the aldermen who have been very involved with us in HACA and the police, of trying to look at this in a global way, and I think that the cooperation is incredibly good now. It continues to improve as each of us has our own roles to play in this. I mean, unfortunately, I think what you're seeing in Annapolis is what you're seeing all over the country, sadly, And
as far as the crime and violence,
the crime, and unfortunately, we all know the drug situation, and that's in the end all about money. So these are the kind of issues that everybody's grappling with, and I credit the mayor and the chief of police of trying. We don't always agree, and we're trying to figure out better ways to work together.
And we said that
residents
and actually
benefit.
Ms. Chapman could probably speak to this. We were talking about this offline, and we said we've never seen the mayor's office as involved in public housing as Mayor Pantelides' administration has been.
Good, bad, or indifferent.
Right, which would be, and if you want to parse it down for a Republican mayor, where stereotypically you would, and again, stereotypically you wouldn't see that sort of interaction. But I mean, he's done some very divisive things. Not divisive, decisive. Sorry,
Right.
We edit that out. But the decisive things as to public housing with the inspections, which I think there's a little friction there. But some of the residents might argue, and again, I'm outside of my wheelhouse here, would argue that the conditions in some of the housing needed to be looked at. So, but there was a financial component that went to HACA, of course, too, because they had to pay for at least I'm not sure if they ended up with a portion or all of the inspection fees.
I think they ultimately ended up working out. I don't think the city got all of their money, and I don't think HACA had to spend all of their money to do it.
But to Ms. Chapman, Deb, have you ever seen an administration that was as responsive?
No, I've never seen that.
How do the residents react to this? I mean, are they obviously, I think a number of them are very much approving of it, but I mean, are they embracing it?
I think on the whole they are, but we have to remember the residents are being told different things, just like everyone else, just like you guys have your impression of what's going on in public housing. It's the same thing. They did not understand why the city was doing the inspections. A lot of them didn't. So it was up to the Resident Advisory Board and HACA to let them know this is a good thing. It's residents who have come to the city council asking them to become involved because their units weren't as they should be. So, it varies.
Is there a certain
Even
amount
now, some people still feel that the city should not have come in. But
and what's the reason
I
for that?
believe on the whole that most of them are thankful now because a lot of things got done.
Why are they disagreeing with the city coming in? Are they fearful that it's an overreach, or is it?
It's been told to them by others that it's because the city wants to take over public housing.
or shut it down?
All right,
Let's
squash this right. Let's squash this right here.
Which is ridiculous. The city do not have the power to do it, even if they wanted to. And I've never gotten the impression that the city wanted to. Why would they?
And that's what I'm looking. I'm wondering why you guys want to be on the board too.
Now, HACA, the public housing is an unusual organizational structure. Okay, the mayor appoints the board members, and then is approved by the council, and then it's hands off.
Yes.
We got into the thing when Ellen Moyer was mayor, where the police don't have authority on HACA property, and they got back on. So we've worked through that. But this is an organization that is chartered by the state. Am I correct? That it's established under a state charter as an independent entity, but the state has sort of handed off the appointments of the board to the city. Isn't that correct?
Well, actually, we're talking at the federal level.
Okay.
This originally was all sanctioned through HUD, and over the years, how HUD works, at least on this part, is that they have in every area, and in our case, the governing authority for us is in Baltimore. Okay, the HUD agency, the regional is a good way to put it, and so that they work closely with us in that regard, and they are the ones that are responsible to ensure we're in compliance and, provide us assistance and be the liaison for this whole thing. So it's really and if just to take a minute, what's really happened, and this has gone back a number of years, HUD wants out of the business of public housing. Okay?
Yeah.
And so we're in a situation where there's a lot of concern and confusion of what that means. But what it really means is that they don't believe folks should be kicked out or not be in facilities. It's how are they built, who governs them from the standpoint of they're looking to public or private companies, and there are a number who partner with like us and redevelop or build public housing facilities and then the other approach is the approach of trying to integrate, if you will, housing of all income levels in the same areas, the same communities. You read about this in different ways. So there's really, to a lot of folks, there's a lot of misinformation. And if I can take 1 minute, because the analogy to me is this, and I hate to keep going back to the hospital, but for years I would talk to people around Annapolis, okay? And they didn't know we actually had OB and that we had a NICU and we had all this. And we are, and I'm proud of it, the second largest birthing facility in the state of Maryland.
I know that.
So my point is, you didn't know that?
No.
Well, okay. So the bottom line is that communication, we haven't been effective, I don't think, HACA, in telling our story. And so we're trying to not only open up, but to get folks such as yourself, and we appreciate it, to want to hear from us so that we can hopefully get out to all our publics a better understanding of what we are and what we're trying to do. In essence, we are a real estate company that has responsibility for over 800 residents, communities, and it's our responsibility to keep them up to code, to make them, if you need to rehab or if you need to start all over. And what you have is you have a number of these communities that were built in the 60s that honestly have not had a lot of time and energy or money spent on them.
Do you know what we learned from Mr. Eads? I didn't know this, and you probably knew this, that the Harbor House was initially built as luxury condominiums.
I knew it.
I had no idea.
The same
about
people
it.
that built
lived.
Watergate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
When
And they
the
were,
Housing
right?
Authority first took over Harbor House, I lived there. And they were like luxury apartments. I mean, hardwood floors and all. It was great, It was not the typical public housing,
Right.
But then, going to a hotel in New York that was beautiful in the 60s, but now it's a little bit threadbare, and you could see that at one point it was incredible. But
It's really
Yes.
opulent.
That's how come they have a swimming pool. It came that way. It was there when the Housing Authority took it over. They would have never had put a swimming pool in public housing.
All right, so if public housing in Annapolis, it's like a marriage. So we're going through marriage counseling right now, and this is where it gets awkward. So we're throwing everything out there, and we're working through it. So we've had a couple audits this year that did not come out well, and then just yesterday, I think HUD put HACA on properties on a watch list, which is the second time. How do we work through that? What's the next steps? Because again, a lot of that, there's probably people who are no longer on the board. No fingers are getting pointed. But I mean, there's you guys have been left to unravel that knot.
And blaming somebody doesn't really solve anything.
Because it's where you are.
This is the hand that we're dealt. Now we need to play it.
That's basically the past. Like you say, it would do us no good to blame anyone. Whatever happened, happened. Now we have to pick up the pieces, make the best of a bad situation, and move on. And that's what we're going to do.
So how do we start that with a? I guess you have two issues. Is the I guess
the audits,
tied to the audits,
and your challenge. The HACA is challenging the audits, correct, and going to be supplying the. And do you feel as a numbers guy, Mr. Doordan, do you feel confident, or do you not know at this point that this would be a successful to mitigate some of that $3.5 million? I think was the total number.
As I understand it, the issue is in most cases lack of documentation.
Mm-hmm. Can I just read this real quick? This is just from the article, and just so it'll give clarity to the listener. Really, it just said that HUD's decision it's found that $3.4 million in mishandled federal grant money. The problems were linked to contract expenditures and grant money used to help students or residents find job training and other self-improvement programs. But they said a lot of that was missing paperwork. So it sounds like some of that could be cleared up. It could be clerical. It happens, but that's where the source of the problem is.
Exactly, and our folks are trying to reconnect and resurrect. We can verify that the work was done by either whatever. A lot of it, as I understand it, too, there were contracts for certain things, and the contract ended, but the work continued for the next year, whether it was, let's say, landscaping or something of this nature. So we're trying to go back and resurrect what we can with the inspectors, and we're hopeful. We don't know. We don't know, but we're certainly hopeful that if not all, the majority of that, the documentation or lack thereof will be verified in a different way so that we're not having to pay back money that was legitimately used for things.
And in all fairness, I think it's got to be noted that, I'm not giving anyone passes, but I'm saying is that you were both very new board members when it's all said. I mean, so you have inherited, I won't say a mess, but you've inherited issues that have existed before you've been here.
Yes.
So that's when you're looking ahead saying, and there is going to be an amount of distrust from the residents of Annapolis and from the residents of public housing. And, I can sense a frustration where in the articles that I've read, just saying, we're trying to be open. We're trying, it's a new way.
I live personally by the thought life is what it is. Okay. And we've inherited what it was. Now we can take that and hopefully the new what it is going to be, done to meet all the regs John, to your point, our main focus right now, besides keeping the ship afloat, is to find the next CEO to come in because at this point we have our head of finance as the temporary or the interim. So we have a search committee and we're
you're proposing or have proposed changing the name. It used to be an executive director. It used to be called, and now it's going to be a CEO of the thing. So
that's a sort of an evolution that personally I feel strongly about. Mm-hmm. The bylaws are being updated with committees. One of the first things when I came there was to ask for the bylaws and found that they really haven't been looked at since 2004. And I'm used to our board looking at them every year.
It's a living document that evolves.
Exactly. So we're trying over the next month to reinforce that and be open with everybody about here's what we're doing and here's where they were and here's what we're doing.
Well, sort of tying into the audit thing, where does HACA get, in general terms, their money? Obviously we've got some rent because you've got some mixed income properties. You've also got some, I guess, true public housing. What's the difference? How would you define the difference between somebody like Oberry Court or Annapolis Gardens versus Robinwood, Newtown 20? Is that
Robinwood, Newtown 20? Their rent is public housing, which is that they pay 30% of their income.
Okay.
With Oberry Court, Annapolis Gardens is mixed. You'll have market rent, which say if the average rent for that area is $1,500, you have residents there that pay $1,500. Then you have different programs, Section 8, which is a percentage of their rent. You have 10% of them, I believe, is public housing, which is the 30%.
Okay. All right,
So it's mixed.
So you have a
definitely
mixed community. That's very neat. And you own HACA does own those properties as well, right? But they're managed by Oberek, or is that kind of a, because I know that was the whole big argument a couple of years ago about the basketball courts and some of the things that were eliminated.
HACA signed a contract for 15 years that a management company would come in, they would redevelop, they would do whatever needed to be done.
But still under HACA authority. Ish.
It's no.
To a place.
No.
I'm getting
it's not.
head shakes here.
No, it's not. At the end of this 15 years, HACA can buy back that property.
Okay.
If they can afford to. They can buy back that property. And it would be theirs to manage again.
So they have right of first refusal.
Yes.
And the management company apparently has some covenants, if for lack of a better word, that HACA has given upon them, that they have to have some public housing units
Yes.
and whatnot.
Yes.
So you've sort of given them some marching orders and then handed them off?
Yes.
Well, I think, John, of course, what you're seeing here is the evolution of housing going forward. The federal government wants out of the business, and so if we want to upgrade or redo, let's say Newtown, okay, the federal government is not going to
Write a check.
Sure. Okay. So the only way you really can do it in today's world is these joint partnerships, and that's what was done with Annapolis Gardens, I believe,
and Albury.
And so there's a management company who came in, was part of that, and so the role we had that the board had at that time is how do we upgrade this, and that's why the John Dillon coming on and folks like that who have that expertise are going to be great help to us, because that's where the world's going. And
Right.
So while it's scary to some, old man Eustace is dead. And so it's how do we do things going forward? And that's what the board is getting educated on, and that's why we had talked, and the mayor found us a John Dillon who has that kind of expertise to bring to the board. So we're just like with any board, we're trying to get different folks that have different perspectives and make the right decisions
In a
for
town that hates change
Yes.
of any kind.
And I think HACA's role through all of this, we learned a lot from Oberry Court and College Creek. We have to make sure that
You said College Creek?
Oberry Court, College Creek Terrace.
Okay.
We were
Where
arguing
is
about
College Creek Terrace? Is that that's not Bloomsbury, is it?
No, that's not Bloomsbury.
Okay.
Oberry Court, you know where that is?
Yeah, that's off of Taylor and Glenwood.
Oberry Court, College Creek Terrace is one community.
Okay.
With two different names. On one side of the street, it was Oberry Court. On the other side of the street,
It's like Harbor House and Eastport Terrace.
exactly.
Right.
Okay. Now you've solved that mystery for me.
I think
After you broke your
Allison
train of thought.
really learned a lot from the first two. So we have to be very careful when we negotiate that the residents have input in what is going on, what's going to happen to them. Because one of the complaints that I've heard, because I wasn't here in Annapolis doing all of this, but I always heard, we got the short end of the deal. We're not allowed to do things. We don't have as much rights as public housing residents have. We're not getting the same things that public
Attention.
housing. So when we go into it, because like where I live, Morris Blum, they were in the process of going through that same redevelopment. And I kept saying, we have to make sure that the residents are given a fair shake. don't keep telling the residents nobody's going to have to move, because that's not true. They have to be able to make money, because if they could do it the same way as public housing, then we would be able to do it. They have to bring in mixed income,
Right.
or it won't work. So those were the kind of things that I heard happen with Annapolis Gardens. The company came in and it's going to be so nice. We're going to put washers and dryers. Well, they put all the focus on these extra things, not telling them, but some of you are not going to be able to live here. You're not going to qualify to live here. Your credit is not going to be what we want it to be for you to live here.
We're going to take some of your rec out, and
Yeah.
So you're kind of saying that any, and I don't want to use the word paranoia, but any incredulous sort of views that the residents have for the city is because it's so tenuous. They feel that it's been done in the past.
Yes.
So any change could be bad.
Yes.
So that the first, when a change comes, fists are up right away, just because it's happened before.
That's right.
you talk about the city, or the residents tend to be a little bit keeping one eye on the city, not quite sure what they're doing. Within reason.
And the other eye is on HACA.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask each of you separately, but within reason, if there's one thing, just one thing the city can do to help improve HACA today, what would it be? And I mean, obviously the big answer is, $120 million, and, but Mike needs to have another fundraiser before that happens. What's one thing?
I couldn't come up with just one thing. It's because it's bigger than that. Like you said, the one thing would probably be the $1 million. Give it to us.
Mm-hmm.
The city can't do that. So to come up with one thing.
Could
impossible
it jump into recreation, more recreation, transportation, maybe to and from the communities, to perhaps like the rec center, to Truxton Park, to some of the other amenities within the city? Is it more staffing of police, which that's another conversation that's going on, to have more police in the communities?
All of the above. I could not come up with one. It's just too much that needs to be done.
All right, so let it be known that
with.
Ms. Chapman has a laundry list.
Yes, a very long laundry.
Mr. Doordan, do you have one thing that might be able to?
My answer would be a ditto to what Sandra has said. Quite frankly, maybe if in a year from now, if you were to ask me, we'd be able to start to clarify. We have a very good dialogue with the city that I'm not so sure was there in the past, because I wasn't there, and we're trying to listen to each other and figure out win-wins. The city has enormous issues to deal with all of our communities. I like to think of where our residents live as part of Annapolis and part of the community, and that we all can work together. So what Sandra's saying, I think there's a multitude of areas, and I couldn't pick one today that is that much ahead of the other.
Well, you're in a tough position because as a relatively new board, and a new board after a lot of turmoil on the board, there's a lot of pieces left on the floor that is left to you folks to pick up. Where do you start with, because you have several groups that are disconnected, starting with the residents of public housing, then the residents of Annapolis who live around public housing, most notably Eastport, the police, the city. These are, if you ask any organization, any business, what their number one problem is, they're always going to say communication. Always. I don't care what business it is. Yeah. That's the number one. So you have to look logistically. There's a lot of things that you have to look at as the past audits and just moving forward what you're going to do. But also there's a legacy of kind of star chamber where there's no transparency, and you've already pledged more for transparency. How do you start pulling the groups together? How do you start looking at everyone saying, all right, we got to start communicating? Because like I said, the Eastport residents and the residents of public housing, they essentially want the same things, and there's no friction between the two of them, because the crime that affects the people who live in Eastport also affects the residents. That's the most, and crime's a symptom,
And they are definitely working together. They have, the resident council of Eastport had a community day during the summer, and I went there. I was totally amazed at the help and the sharing and the communicating that was going on between the Eastport Association and the residents. It was great to see. So I can see their working relationship. They're working on that. I think they may need to come together a little more. And it's time. Time takes care of everything. They need to come together when the association come to the city council. The resident council should be there with them to stand up united. We all are having the same problem. We all need some help. What are you going to do for all of us? Don't separate the public housing residents and the city residents.
One thing, Tim and I have talked about this forever, it seems. And I agree with this idea. What are your thoughts about having a council seat? And I know this is sort of a pie in the sky wish list thing, but a council seat dedicated, an at-large thing to public housing, because public housing is concentrated among in Ward 6, typically a lot of it, and then you've got that Robinwood, which is Ward 6, and I think
it's cut out of 5.
I think if you could stand in the middle of Forest Drive, spread your legs a little bit, you could have 1 foot in Ward 4, 1 in 5, and have 6 running in between your legs. Would that be something that would be a huge benefit to public housing in Annapolis?
Like an unofficial 9th ward, it would be. We've argued that we think that there should, and it's pie in the sky. Everyone giggles at us, but we've argued that I'd like to see an alderperson for business and one for public housing, because they both have specific needs that aren't often addressed by the alderpersons, not by design, but just by happenstance. This is the way it happens. Is especially Ward 1. Alderman Budge, he's torn between the downtown businesses and the residents, and the businesses and residents haven't always gotten together. That they're mutually exclusive in some of their goals. But if you look at public housing, the argument is that you have some public is an alderperson who's representing, let's say Eastport. Do they understand, like we said at the beginning of the podcast here, do they understand the unique challenges that are going on in public housing? And if you had a dedicated alderperson, would that actually go a long way into communicating the very specific needs of the communities within the public housing, and also address the needs of the residents who are getting the spillover, such as the crime?
I'll give you, if Sandra let me give my opinion first. I think that would be the absolute worst thing could ever happen.
So you just knocked down our castle.
No, and the reason, Tim, that's more separation. The one thing that we have to do, and it's a collective we, is build trust. Trust in ourselves, our board trusting itself, then our board, our employees, and building that whole trust, the trust with the police department, the trust with this, the trust with that, and anything that puts people in categories or whatever. I think that's the beauty of any community that you have. And if you're going to represent the community, you have to think that you're representing everybody, even though you may have your district may have heavily commerce versus population density. So to me, that would be the absolute thing worse. And I think that, this whole issue about trust is really where we got to go. And that, as you said, Tim, it's a communication to start with. And it's slow. It's going to take time. But if we don't get here now, we're going back to when I first came to Annapolis. And it concerns me with where this country is. And it concerns me, quite frankly, where the city is and everything else now in regards to the issues of by race, by whatever you want to do. And now, that we just... anything that further that apart, in my judgment, is wrong.
Okay, he's convinced me. That was a stupid idea, Tim.
I don't know, but that would be true, and I would agree with you in principle. But the only thing is, are those people being adequately represented now?
And
it's not the job.
I'm a great believer.
That.
I don't know. I was evaluated every year at what I did with goals and whatever. Politicians, it's a little different, but to me, you're evaluated, I guess, as a politician by whether you get reelected
every 4 years.
And I'm not sure that's necessarily a direct result, but people have to be accountable, and that's all. I mean, we got to. It's not Pollyannish. It's if we're going to go to the next place as a country or as a community here, we've got to figure that out. And that means bringing everybody together to talk, but then to follow through and to trust.
So how do you start that dialogue with everybody?
Well, we're here.
You're doing it now.
All we can do is our part, and we realized that we may not have the best answers, but we're going to answer, and we're going to be honest.
I don't think you can ask for much more.
Well, I don't know. Sandra, I didn't mean to preempt. But I get on a high horse about that.
That's okay.
Good answer. I agree with you 100%. We have, it would be nice, your little council, but I agree with what Chip says. We have people who's representing the wards where public housing is. Do they need to do more? Yes, of course they do. Some of them are becoming more involved now. Some are not. But I think it's going to be something very different about this next election, where you're going to see that people from public housing are going to hold them accountable.
There's
really
some interesting candidates that are looking in Ward 6 that are coming out, and it is very exciting there.
And as a voting block, that it's a very important voting block, and
yes.
I think that's something that people don't talk about. But public housing is an important voting block when it comes to the mayoral election.
Yeah, Tim, I'll give you this whole issue, and it's a small step, but in working with the mayor and working with the police, we found out, that there used to be a memorandum of understanding that helped so everybody knew what was going in regards to our banning policy and things of this nature. That 5 years ago just went away for many different reasons. And so we're saying, well, maybe that's a good idea. So that's a way of the two of us trying to come together and our police force in the city is I was just over in one of our residents. It was very prominent there today, and we're trying to supplement and make our residents feel safe. So, there's small steps, and unfortunately, I won't cry poor, but we really are. HACA has limited resources, and we need to make sure that we use them in the most effective way we can. The city, everybody has the same issues.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, going back to what we were talking more of a broad terms right now, I want to go back to something you just said that we talked about, and I think that actually you might know more about this, is that when it comes to the banning policy, and I think the banning policy of about 5 years, so I think it was right before you came back, I think that was a hot topic, was that we had the banning policy that the argument was, or the theory behind it was that most of the problems that were happening as far as crime within public housing were people coming in from the outside.
Yes.
So the solution was to have a list of people who had some sort of incident, altercation, or some sort of violation within public housing, and they would be on the list. So it seemed simple. I thought everyone was on board. But then it appeared that some people on the board had an issue with it because they said, well, some people on the list are family. So now you're breaking up family units that they can't come visit their kids. So I could see both sides of it. But in talking to some of the residents there and some of the people who are in the know, they said still most of the problems you're having are people coming in from the district or from Baltimore who are coming in. What will you feel about the banning list? I don't think it was ever found unconstitutional, but there was an argument that it may be. But
well, of course, because I wasn't here, like you stated, but I understand it used to be 600 and some people, if not more, that was on the list, and it went down to some ridiculous number now.
Ridiculously small.
Ridiculous, yeah. So I don't really want to answer that because I wasn't here, and when you talk to different people, you get different answers. Mm-hmm. But I know that it's something that we have to really look at, change, right, and act on. And we're in the process of working that out now.
Well, it looks like HACA is certainly on the right path. And I think there's, as Mr. Doordan had said, ask me the same question next year. And I think that might be something that we should do. I think maybe revisit this in 6 months or so, see where we are. I'm looking for good things. I know we've seen some good things that are coming out. We get a new CEO, not an executive director on board, and everything else. But what's real quick, just to wrap up, what's one thing that I don't know about HACA? Just something about the residents, about the community that's good. Give me some feel good. I'm going to ask you the same thing too, Mr. Doordan, on the end.
By the way, Mr. Doordan pronounces it HACA like I do too.
Yes.
So we're not snobs.
HACA or HACA?
John was making fun of me before, like I was being snotty.
I know. When I hear him say it, I chuckle also. The one thing that I think the general public need to know is we have a lot of problems. We are working on them. It's going to take us time. We're going to do what we think is best for the overall communities of HACA.
Correct.
That 90%, and I would like to honestly say that 98% of our residents are good people, law-abiding people. The few people that come in, it's like that's the ones that you hear about. We want to start making sure you hear about our residents that's going to college, our children that's on the honor roll. We're just like any other community, but you hear more about the bad things. So it's up to us to make sure that other side get out. People come into the community and do wrong things. We are at fault as residents because they're coming to visit somebody. They're coming to visit us. We have to take more responsibility. When I lived in Robinwood was like two different communities. I lived all the way in the back where the circle is. Now up the front, the guys were standing on the corner. They were doing what they do. But in the back, you had a group of people that did not allow it. You never saw the guys just standing around.
Mr. Eads said that too, that you had certain areas where things were just not tolerated.
It wasn't tolerated. Now, I tend to say the same thing can happen in our communities now, but it's a difference. They weren't shooting people then. We didn't have the fear because if the guys came back there doing something wrong, us women would go out there and you need to get away from here. I'll call the police, whatever. It's not that way, and people explain that to me now. It's not the same. A community watch, I don't even know if a community watch program would work the same as it used to, So if it's one thing I want people to know is overall, they're good people. It's the outsiders or it's the people who live there that's not holding their family, their friends, their guests accountable.
We're working on it.
And that's something the police agree with, and that's the residents. I think more and more people are realizing that, where before they would stereotype the people in public housing, and now they're realizing a lot of it, they just want regular lives like everyone else.
That's it.
That's it. Well, I want to thank you guys for the time this afternoon. I would like to come back in maybe 6 months and see where we are, because I think there's some great strides that are being made for HACA, both in getting off of the watch list and the fiscally things, and certainly the steps that the mayor has made. I want to commend the mayor for reaching out and doing this, which is a breath of fresh air as far as I'm concerned, as an outsider, to see him reaching out. And I want to thank Mr. Chip Doordan, who has stepped forward to serve on the board, and Ms. Chapman, who is chairman of the board, and you'll be on there for another, 3 more years, I think?
I'll be on the board for another 3 more years.
3 more years, right.
But we have elections every year.
Right.
And it's brave of you to take this on, because I know there's a lot to do.
If there's anything that we can do to help your message, help the message of the communities, please, we're more than willing to do that, because, Annapolis is a larger community. It's not just public housing and everything else. So that's that from about HACA, and I think we're about out of time.
Could I just state one thing, and,
Sure.
and maybe you can help with this too? I'm a great believer, and I learned this as a young administrator, in ability to change. And I think, that we have to, we all grew up in certain ways, some of it good, some of it not good or whatever. But I think the world's changing. And the key for the success of Annapolis, the key for the success of HACA.
You and I will hang out together. They can hang out together.
Is the ability to change. And that's hard for people. But I think we're at a place, and I think it's still a relatively small town, that if people were willing to look at change for the better, that we could do it as a community. And where our residents are just part of the community. They're not separate from the community. They're part of the community. Some of them just happen to live in certain residential areas. And we need to look at where we are in that way, in my judgment.
All right. Well, good thoughts for everything. And thank you both for coming on and being so candid. I really appreciate it. And good luck to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
In the meantime, that does it for us. What you want to do is you want to follow us on Twitter at MD Crabs Podcast. We have that to let you know when the new shows are coming out. We're going to have a mailing list that's going to be going live soon too, so you can get the emails. And we have 2 Facebook places for you to go. We have a page and a group. Both are called the Maryland Crabs. So give us a like or ask to join the group. If you have anything you want to post, anything you want to hear from us, you can post there. You can go online at themarylandcrabs.com. And if you want to email us, we are at info@themarylandcrabs.com. And finally, if you want to follow John on Twitter, he's at IAnnapolis, and I am at Tim Hamilton 47. And you can always friend us on Facebook, because we're both wildly amusing. So, folks, thanks again for coming today. And this has been fantastic. And thanks for Rhonda Wardlaw for putting this together, and the mayor's office. We really do appreciate that.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.